Good evening. We'll begin the class. Yogena chittasya padena vancham alam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakrotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. I think we completed the 28th sutra, Yoganga Anusthana Asuddhikshaye Aviveka Kyatehi Jnanadipti. So that we completed. That is when we are able to reduce the impurities or remove the impurities by the practice of eightfold discipline. It's called Ashtanga Yoga. Then we are able to gain this Viveka Khyati, means knowledge of higher wisdom, an insight into everything. So this Viveka Khyati has got a number of interpretations. That is a stage on the way to Asamprajnata Samadhi, the technical language of yoga. But in real, actual life, in normal life situations, it is the beginning of an insight. We get an insight into things. We are able to see through some of the normal events, including our own emotions and feelings. And above everything, we get an insight into our own mental world. That is the beginning of this evolution. It's called, we used to use the word, pariprasava, means counter evolution. More our ascent towards higher wisdom. Now, we have already left out one or two sutras which really describe the 7 stages that we will take up after we finish yamas and niyamas. That is the 27th one, Tasya Saptadha Pranta Bhumi Prajna. So how one goes through the 7 stages on the way to attaining this insight, prajna. In the technical language of yoga philosophers, it has got a certain stages, milestones, so to speak. The first 4 stages, which is called Jnana Nivritti, Jihasa Nivritti, Prepsa Nivritti, and Chikisha Nivritti. We'll discuss this later. First 4 stages constitute 1 milestone. And the second stage consists of 3 stages. It's called Chitta Vimukti. It called Shoka Nivritti, Bhaya Nivritti, and Sagala Vikalpa Nivritti. We'll discuss this later. Now we'll come to the 29th Sutra. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samatheha, Ashtangani. These are the 8 limbs, so to speak. Self-restraint, observances, posture, regulation, breath, withholding of senses, fixing the mind, meditation, and higher concentration. These are the 8 stages, of which yamas are considered to be more universal in nature, because these are some of the fundamental values of self-restraint, moderation, is a kind of level-headedness, which are necessary for the sustenance and preservation of values in our culture. So it is considered to be universal, as Patanjali is going to explain, yamas. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. The 5 disciplines, yamas. They are not necessarily limited to spiritual life or the life of a yogi. These are fundamental values, but they are included as as constituting the first step, because that's where we begin. All these 5 disciplines have got 2 stages. One, the stage as we enter. For example, let us say ahimsa. It's a non-violence. It's a meaning here. Non-violence in action, in word, in thought, in speech, in everything. That is a discipline that we begin to practice. It's some kind of it very close to the normal practice of compassion, good feeling, friendship, let us say a law-abiding life. That's the essence of it, which, as I mentioned, is common and necessary for everyone. In its higher stage, ahimsa means a stage where you cannot think, act, or speak anything that would do any kind of harm to anybody or anything, which becomes a natural instinct for those who are highly evolved. So it has 2 stages. One, as a discipline, that we all begin with. So sometimes it is stated, without the practice of ahimsa, there will be no peace in society and there will be no peace in our mind. And in its higher sense, it is a state of spiritual affinity with the whole creation, where you cannot actually do any harm to anybody because you don't see anything or anyone as alien or distinct from yourself. So 2 stages. The second one is niyamas. That's also important. The important point is niyamas shaucha santosha tapaswadhyaya isar pradhana. They are important, but we have to remember these niyamas have no real value without the practice of yama. The shaucha, purity, inner purity, outer purity, called Bahi Shuddhi, Abhyantara Shuddhi, and also. We will discuss this the light of the commentaries. So these values, so let's say observance of cleanliness, contentment, austerity, study, and surrender to God. These values are very important. They will help us to move forward along the path of spiritual life. But they by themselves are not necessarily very spiritual in nature without being accompanied, when they are not accompanied by the yamas. For example, a person who doesn't practice ahimsa, he doesn't practice non-violence, he can practice a lot of cleanliness, he'll be perfectly contented. Others will not be very happy with him. He'll be very happy with him. This is called santosha. So you find many of the villains of the world were extremely happy with themselves, but others felt less than happy in their presence. So it's a very clear example of this. Again, austerity. You find in the Hindu mythological stories, many of the demons were very strong-willed persons. They did a lot of austerities. It is some of the demons practiced meditation for thousands of years. Hindu mythology mentions many of the villains of Ramayana, like Ravana, Kumbhakarna. All these were not, they were men of strong stuff, mind you. They were men of strong determination, steely determination. And they actually practiced all this. You know, they practiced 3 times bath every day, so cleanliness was there. And then, as I mentioned, they were very happy with themselves. Santosha was there. and then very rigorous self-discipline. Ravana was ready to offer his own head in exchange for these higher demonic powers. That was the that was the type of person he was. So naturally, they had all these qualities, but no himsa. He was a very violent person, surrendering to God. Also, he had a sense of understanding that he had to depend upon some higher power. That he knew, but without any of the yamas. So that's an important point which commentators make in strong language. All the niyamas are wonderful, but they're wonderful for others only when they're accompanied by the more fundamental spiritual values, is it called, which are technically categorized under the heading yamas. Now, to understand the importance of these values, let's say ahimsa in the context of yoga. Now, why do we practice? Why did Patanjali begin his sutra, ahimsa, his first one? When he lists out the disciplines and the yamas in ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigrha. He mentioned ahimsa because you are supposed to practice asana, pranayama, pratyahara, these three important disciplines, and then dharana, dhyana, samadhi, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And they together form a cluster, which is called samyama. So there is a physical, then there is a moral, intellectual, and also there is a spiritual uh, disciplines involved. Suppose a person practices this value meditation, let us say. Dharana is the beginning of meditative life. Then dhyana, which is a higher stage. And asana and pranayama and pratyahara, ability to sit for a long time. Asana, we should understand, no? Asana is explained in the language of Vijnana Bhikshu in a very powerful technical language, which I shall explain later. But it is important to remember येन संस्थानेन अवस्थितस्य स्थैर्यं सुखं च सिद्ध्यति तत् स्थिर सुखम आसनम. That is Patanjali's own Yoga Sutra. By assuming what posture, येन संस्थानेन अवस्थितस्य स्थैर्यं सुखम, mean you should be able to sit for a long time, स्थैर्यं, continuously, without any break, without any disturbance, and in a relaxed mood. It should be a very pleasant experience, sukham. It is prayatna shaithilyam, that is the language in the Yoga Sutra literature. Means without any feeling of effort, not at all without any labor, without any strain, one should be able to sit for a long time, because with the strain, mind will be disturbed, and also a person who practices sitting in the same posture for a long time without relaxation, but with a lot of strain and effort, that person is inviting nervous excitement and also headache, because nervous system gets contracted and it creates strain. So it should be pleasant and relaxed and an enjoyable state of sitting for a long time without any effort. So that is the meaning of asana. Now, suppose a person practices this or meditation without being established in non-violence. What happens? The practice of the first few steps will generate a lot of physical energy, intellectual energy, nervous energy. That's one of the reasons why people who practices pranayama sometimes develops manic excitement, which when they stop practicing, leads to depression. You can avoid these bipolar problems, because a lot of effort that nervous system gets contracted, and you concentrate a lot of oxygen within the body. Antakumbhaka means through pranayama, breath is retained, and that actually activates some of the nervous system within the body. Nadi Vyuha, it is called. And that leads to generation of surplus energy. And the surplus energy should not overflow into wrong and undesirable channels. For that reason, a person should be established in non-violence. Otherwise, he'll become hyper-violent. A naturally violent person who is not established in non-violence, ahimsa, if he practices some of the early disciplines of Ashtanga Yoga, he may generate energy, and his natural instincts and characteristics will become hyper-activated when he generates energy. Of course, this is relevant only in the context of long and dedicated practices. If a person is not practicing asana, pranayama for not long time, only very, very short time, there's no problem. But those who are committed to Ashtanga Yoga, who takes to Ashtanga Yoga without being established in Yama, are inviting trouble. That's the most interesting psychological aspect of beginning the sutra explaining Yama with ahimsa. And similarly, all other characteristics. Because ultimately, when you succeed in reaching asampragnata samadhi, according to Advaita tradition, that makes you fit for jnana prapti. Because when all the chittavrittis are completely transcended, that leads to a state of mind which is called chitta shuddhi, sattva shuddhi, and that leads to jnana prapti, and that leads to moksha. That's why Shankaracharya says in one context, realizing one's to be Brahman, what happens, when you reach that state, when you attain that state, you feel there is nothing more to be attained. When you understand that state, you will feel there is nothing more to be known. And that state of complete perfection is the core. But to begin with, one should be established in the 5 fundamental yamas. That is why Patanjali begins ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. It's mentioned here. In the context, while describing this Satya, Jnana Bhikshu in his important Yoga Vartiga makes some important observations. Satyam yatharthe vagmanase. Truthfulness means you keep word and mind in one line. That means you should be completely, but whatever we speak should be in total conformity with what we have in our mind. Word and mind correspond exactly to what we are seeing. That's why yatha dushtam, yatha numidam, yatha sudam, tatha vagmanaschedi. So what we have heard, what we have seen, what we have experienced, that should be our articulation by speech. Paratra sabodha sankranti vagta sa yadi na vanchidam prandava pradivatti bendhava bhavetidi yesha sarva bhudopagaarartham pravutta na bhudo abhaghataya. So whatever we speak should be for the good of others. That's something very interesting. It's a very balanced explanation. In fact, that's why yoga is different from Jaina tradition. In Jaina tradition, for example, you should practice non-violence, so you practice total kind of disconnect with the rest of the world. So you should not breathe in bacteria, you should not step on ants. That is going to an extreme point where people may sometimes feel that it is not realistic or practical. So also speaking the truth. Suppose you don't like a person, you find you in his presence, you say, you are speaking the truth, I don't like you. That should not be done. That's what Yoga Sutra says. So the commentary is simple. Yesha sarva bhutopagharartham. It should, whatever you speak should be the good of others, for the good of others. Should speak the truth, but it should be a truth for the good of others. Na bhuto upaghataya. It should not in any way do any harm to anybody. Yedicha evam api abhidhiyamana syat na satyam bhave papameva bhave. Suppose we speak a word which is certainly not false, which is perfectly true, but if that statement creates a lot of harm to others, then it will be harmful, it is papa, it is a sin, it is wrong. That's what Vijnana Bhikshu says. So you can see the wisdom of Patanjali. Of course, Vijnana Bhikshu's interpretation. So that's why, Satyam Bruyat, Priyam Bruyat, Na Bruyat Satyam Apriyam. Priyam cha na anudam Bruyat, Yeshu Dharma Sanatana. So we should speak the truth. The truth should be able to produce some pleasant result to ourselves and others. We should not necessarily speak a truth which is unnecessary for you to make a statement of, which is very unpleasant and harmful to others. That we should avoid. That's why Vijnana Bhikshu says, Tena punya abhasena punya pradirupagena kashtam tamaprapnuya. And he says, suppose a person speaks truth. Well, he says it's a great virtue. We should speak the truth. But that act only produces unpleasant results. He attains only painful darkness. That's the language used. Therefore, after careful consideration, one should speak the truth which is beneficial to everyone. That's a very interesting. Tasmat parikshya sarvabhudahidam satyam bruyat. Therefore, now we should remember it is a very deep philosophical interpretation of the concept of what is true or the truth itself. What it means is the ultimate goal of all these disciplines is our own spiritual growth and to help others to do something that is beneficial to everyone. So that is the ultimate result. So that's why Vijnana Bhikshu very elaborately discusses philosophy of truthfulness, philosophy and also psychology, because he makes a statement, Tena punya abhasena punya pradirupakena kashtam tama prapnuya. Suppose punya abhasa means something which appears to be true, appears to be virtuous, good, but not really. That's punya abhasa. Suppose a person very proud of his habit of truthfulness. He tells something which is unnecessary, which only produces unpleasant results. But he just unilaterally makes the statement, claiming that it is a virtue to speak the truth. Then it becomes punya bhasa. It's not a virtuous deed, it is only a sham virtue. That is the language of Vijnana Bhikshu in his Yoga Vartika. That's why it's important to understand the meaning of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the language and interpretation of commentators. Otherwise, it can have a lot of lopsided interpretations. Next one is, asteya. Asteya is abstinence from theft. It's a natural, um, which well known. We should not, that is, one should not practice desire for things that do not belong to us. And then continence. Now, that is an important discipline in the yoga. Unless a person practices continence, unless a person practices discipline, self-restraint, he won't be able to generate and conserve his nervous energy, physical energy, intellectual energy, enough to continue his spiritual evolution till he reaches the eighth stage. Uh, that's why some of the great scripture like Daksha Samhita says, Smaranam Kirtanam Keli Prekshanam Bhyabhashanam Sangalpo Adhivasayascha Kriya Nispatirevacha Edat Maithinam Ashtangam Pravadanti Manishinaha Vibridam Brahmajadyam Anushtheya Mumukshubhi. So it means conservation, preservation, protection of the biological drives, sex energy, which is actually the asset, the wealth, the investment, the spiritual inheritance by which the person will be able to accomplish anything sublime and lasting in one's life. That's why it is important to practice this self-restrained continence. Because the aparigraha, not receiving gifts, that's a real literal meaning. Non-covetousness. So that is a Vishayanam, Arjana, Rakshana, Kshaya, Sangha, Himsa, Doshadarshana, Aswikaranam, Aparigraha, Iti Ete Yama. So very interesting and complete interpretation here. You can find not accepting things from others when it is not necessary. We cannot physically practice this because, especially modern times, when we are living in a world where give and take is totally unavoidable. So one may get away with a very literal interpretation. But the commentators are giving in their interpretation with great insight and foresight. So the idea given is very interesting. Means we should understand the various problems that come out of blind acquisition of things that we may not always require. And by acquisition, by protection, by decay. So let us say when a person has got a strong desire to acquire things which he may not actually be in need of, he should remember it's no use for me. It is bound to decay and it will not last long. Therefore, there's no point in going after things which I don't really need. So that state of mind is called aparigraha. It is in a way a higher value than asteya. Asteya, of course, is very, very clear, non-stealing. But aparigraha is a more profound concept. It's again a person who practices aparigraha will be able to practice santosha, contentment. That is part of the niyamas. A person who is practicing himsa will be able to practice natural inner purity, shaucha, and naturally he won't be doing any harm to others, so he will not have any you don't have any room for any kind of dissatisfaction. So santosha will be natural. And then dedication, devotion to certain spiritual disciplines will be natural. So tapa will be natural, contentment will be natural, and all these can be easily attained, practiced if a person, he devotes himself, if he resorts to Ishvara Pranidhana. In the later functions, you find Vijnana Bhikshu makes it very clear in some context that many of these disciplines are already included. In fact, this Ashtanga Yoga is actually, it is an umbrella term. It includes many of the disciplines already mentioned in the Samadhipada. So we should always keep in mind that we are treating the Patanjali Yoga Sutra text from a different angle, from the practical angle. In the normal printed versions that you find, that you're available in bookstore, the first chapter will be Samadhipada, second will be Sadhanapada, third will be Vibhudipada, fourth will be Kaivalyapada. But in actual practice, Sadhanapada, practice comes first, and then comes the results of the practice, and then the third stage comes Samadhi, which is concentration, which is a result of this long practice and being established in practice. And fourth stage is Kaivalya, liberation. So it's a normal stage. So we take up this. So in this particular description, Vijnana Bhikshu says, we may have already discussed certain other disciplines earlier, Abhyasa and Vairagya, Shraddha and Pranayama. Some of these disciplines are already discussed in the Samadhipada. It's not come to us, we'll come late, we'll practice later, we'll take it up later. So Abhyasa and Vairagya, Shraddha, Pranayama, all these disciplines that we may have already taken up are included in Ashtanga Yoga. Similarly, he says, Tapa, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana. These three important disciplines which constitute Kriya Yoga, which we discussed in the first sutra of Sadhanapada. You should remember, we are discussing right now the 30th sutra. But the first sutra of Sadhanapada that we discussed maybe 2-3 months before, we discussed Kriya Yoga, which has got three important disciplines, Tapa, Swadhyaya, and Ishvara Pranidhana. Now, Vijnana Bhikshu says in his commentary, Ashtanga Yoga includes all this. It includes Kriya Yoga, it includes Abhyasa, Vairagya, everything. So it is an umbrella term. Actually, it is the main highway. There are other roads which may join this highway, but this is the main freeway, highway, whatever you may call it. That's an important thing to remember. So that is the importance of Ashtanga Yoga. And then Ete Jadi Desha Kala Samaya Anavichinna. That is a sutra. These disciplines, that is Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. That is non-violence, truthfulness, abstinence from theft, continence, and non-covetousness. These 5 disciplines, they are not conditioned by any class, place, time, or concept of duty, or nationality, or religion, or anything. They are fundamental universal values, these yamas. So they are called Sarvabhauma. They together constitute, these 5 disciplines constitute a great vow which will help us in sustaining values in society and in our culture. That's the idea behind. So they are called Sarvabhauma. Sarvabhauma literally means that which has got a relevance all over the earth, or in all the time, everywhere, and in all aspects. That's the real meaning of Sarvabhauma Mahabhutam. They are the great vows which are universal and not confined or limited to any particular religion, culture or nationality or society. It constitutes a universal spiritual way of life. That's why Sarva Bhumishu, Sarva Vishayeshu, Sarvatha Eva, Avidita Vibhichara, Sarva Bhauma, Mahavata Vitichide. So Vyasa has got a very, very powerful statement. Everywhere, in everything, in all respects, in all our actions, in every possible way, these important disciplines are to be taken into consideration. That is the idea behind it. Now we have come to niyamas. Shaucha, Santosha, Tapa, Swadhyaya, Ishara Pranidhananik Niyama. These observances, cleanliness, Shaucha is used here. Shaucha has got two aspects. One is Abhyantara Shaucha, inner purity, purity of the mind, purity of emotions, purity of feelings, attitudes, and purity of the body. The great danger is that sometimes, because it's difficult to practice mental purity, purity of emotions and feelings, we literally interpret as external purity. It's very easy, it's just taking a bath. It just happens. So in that respect, the concept of Sauja as being hijacked by traditional practitioners of many of the established religions. In all religious traditions, this happened. Purity as being limited to the physical, and that leads to fanaticism. But there are commentators who have observed again and again, if you have an option to practice external purity or internal purity. Well, suppose you say, I can practice compassion, kindliness, broad-mindedness, all these qualities I can do. But I can't take a bath. Maybe there is no bathroom, there is no other facilities. But one can sit and think of, meditate on these values and practice them. And if that is the option, then we should focus on internal purity. So the commentators, in the way some of the commentaries have observed, if a person has an option to practice only one of the two, that is external purity or internal purity, he or she should practice internal purity. Because without internal purity, external purity can become mechanical. In fact, that's why instead of religion, people sometimes practice religiosity with just external practices of rituals, so-called. So because external practices, the danger of making us stuck at some lower level of a spiritual life. Internal purity is not so difficult. There are great and various ways of purifying our emotions and feelings and thoughts. Great music, genuinely spiritual music, great art, great literature, great associations. We can't have direct association. We can associate with the thoughts of great spiritual teachers by reading their books or maybe talking, thinking, listening to their ideas. That has the effect of purifying our emotion, our mind, our thoughts, feelings. It is called Abhyantara Shaujam or inner purity. That is the first niyamas. As I mentioned earlier, all these disciplines, which are put under the category of niyamas, have relevance and importance from a spiritual perspective only if they are accompanied by yamas. Otherwise, they don't have any particular significance. As I mentioned, in modern times, you take bath very well and you have perfectly contented, and you work very hard, 7 days of the week, 24 hours of the day, workaholism, all these are wonderful things, professionalism, going for the results. So all these are actually Shauja Tapa. Tapa includes continued practice of pursuit of something. All these are natural, but they themselves do not constitute spirituality or spiritual values. They don't have any spiritual significance if they are not accompanied by yamas. Swadhyaya. Swadhyaya actually means study. Study here, of course, this is the old language, as I mentioned in my previous class, many of the Sanskrit terms have got two approaches in interpreting the meaning. That Sanskrit hermeneutics is very elaborate, but the broadest principle, the Rudhi and Yogika, the literal meaning and the conventional meaning. Rudhi means conventional. Certain words have acquired certain relevance and significance in the course of the evolution of the word, loaded with meaning and implications that goes far beyond what it literally could mean or imply. That is conventional meaning or rudhyartha. Rudhi. Yogica artha means etymological. So here, the meaning of swadhyaya should be understood in the broad category: teaching oneself, studying oneself. Could be studying, reading, feeding our mind with good food, good ideas, which constitute good spiritual food, healthy food for the mind. And Ishvara Pridhana means surrender to God. That's very simple for those who are ready for it. In spiritual life, Ishvara Pridhana has got a great significance because actually it is a very, for sincere spiritual seekers, sincere devotees of God, surrender is very scientific, psychologically very efficient and effective. If you read Augustine's Confessions, confession is not a periodical license or renewal program. Confession is actually when we confess literally, we are actually beginning a new life. Confession. True confession can be beginning of a new life. It's a total surrender to God. It's called Prapatya Sharanagati. Anugulyasya Sankalpaha Pradigulyasya Vantanam Rakshasiridi Vishwasa Goptrutta Varanam Tha Atmaniksheva Karpanne Shadvidha Sharanagati. These are the 6 important disciplines according to Vaishnava tradition, which constitute surrender to God, which you find in the life of all the great mystics of medieval Europe. You find total surrender, positive thought, total freedom from negativity, a sense of accepting God as a protector, a sense of self-surrender. So, because that takes a huge burden off our shoulders, and we are able to feel a great sense of freedom and a feeling of relaxation, as if a huge weight is taken off our shoulders. Total surrender. So these are 5 disciplines which constitute niyamas. The 5th, the 33rd sutra tells us something important. Vitarka badhine pratipaksha bhavana. Now the question arises. Suppose we are practicing these disciplines. Mind doesn't always permit us to do what we want to. Physically, one can practice silence, but mind becomes hyperactive when the senses become inactive. Suppose if you take a decision, I shall observe certain disciplines. Physically, it may be easier, but mind doesn't cooperate. Where the body becomes, or the senses become physically inactive, the mind could become hyperactive. Mind also should become self-restrained. That's not easy. The self-surrender is an important discipline. That's why, according to Vedantic tradition, there are two disciplines mentioned, Shama and Dhamma. Virajya Vishaya Vrada Dosha Drishtya Muhurmuhu Sulakshe Nedavastha Manasa Shama Uchidi. So self-restraint of the mind. When our mind is directed, is distracted towards various sense objects, then dosha drishtya, we should remind ourselves of the danger in getting the mind drawn towards external sensory pleasures. Is it like being attracted towards mental psychological poison? Because mind gets drawn towards external sensory pleasures, then mind gets colored by that, and then the mind goes after it, and if you are not able to acquire that, we become disturbed. So the first important principle is shama, means self-restraint. And in dhamma, the vishayabhis paravritya sthapanam susagolage ubhayesham indriyanam sadama parigetida. I mean, even if the eyes or the senses of perception get connected to external objects of pleasure, we should not allow that to affect our mind. So mind should be restrained. Now, the question is, this is of course not an easy task. So Patanjali gives an easy solution for the beginners. Vitarka badhane pratipaksha bhavanam means when negative thoughts, unfriendly thoughts, perverse thoughts oppose and torture our mind, then we should cultivate the opposite thoughts. This is the meaning of pratipaksha bhavana. What it actually implies in real life is, suppose we feel great attraction to certain things. Let's say most common attraction for people, is wealth, money, and so on. And when we are aware of the need to restrain ourselves, then we should think of the evil consequences, the problems that extreme attraction towards wealth, even though we have enough that's necessary for us, still blind attraction towards wealth can sometimes torment the mind. Then we should remind ourselves, we should remind our own mind of the problems hiding behind whenever these thoughts come. See, blind pursuit of wealth can lead to tragedies, dissatisfaction, discontentment, perpetual feeling of incompleteness. They are never happy, always looking for something fresh, something new, something that attracts our senses. So this continues because all the time, all the five senses of perception, eyes, ears, all the five senses are drawn towards external things. And then we go after them. And when we do not get, we become dissatisfied. And that makes our life happy. But actually, life is not a blind pursuit of wealth and comforts. Anyone who interprets life as a pursuit of wealth and comforts is bound to be unhappy at some point of time. So you'll be doomed to live in a state of perpetual unhappiness. These are the thoughts that we should make use of to counter when we are affected by greed for more and more wealth. This is what happens. This principle can be applied in all aspects, in all respects. When we become extremely attached to power, then we can say how disastrous it could be if you go after power, blind pursuit of power. can land us in a state of perpetual, unbroken state of unhappiness and dissatisfaction. Whole life becomes a torment, a torture, if we are doomed to live in a state of unhappiness. So these are the real facts, but we forget this when we are in blind pursuit of all these power and wealth. So we should, Pratipaksha Bhavanam, take the help of these thoughts, these realities. They are opposite thoughts that will blunt the edge of greed and thirst for power. But this could happen only for those who are already looking for some higher value in life. Then it becomes easy. That's why Patanjali says, Vitarka Badhani, when perverse thoughts, opposing thoughts, unfriendly thoughts, when our mind becomes a tormentor. If you want to practice contentment, but mind won't permit you. Mind forces us to go after things which we know we are not in need of, but still mind will torment us and force us to go after things which we don't really need. We don't really need. So what happens? Then we should remind ourselves of the undesirable consequences of this blind pursuit of what actually attracts our mind, our senses. So that is Pratipaksha Bhava. It is very, very interesting, but very simple psychological tool that Patanjali is recommending for the beginners in spiritual life. These are all, many of these have a relevance that goes far beyond the yoga context. Many of these ideas can be part of simple common sense, simple wisdom. Just maturity of outlook and attitude in life. That's the uniqueness of especially this part of the Yoga Sutras. Now we can have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions.
Go ahead, PG. You have your question.
Yeah, I was just getting it up. Swamiji, I'm very confused about one thing, right? And this we were texting on the side here. If brahmacharya is so paramount, how do we even exist as a society? We'll cease to exist.
And of course, in the coming sutras, there are many sutras which were commented to say. It is not, Patanjali is a very realistic person, much more realistic than most of us, with perfectly level-headed. So what he is talking about is the importance of self-restraint. That's important. Patanjali is not recommending the entire humanity should become a monastic community. Not at all. Far from it. Not only that, Yoga Sutras are not necessarily meant for monastics. In fact, only just a few monastic communities have taken Yoga Sutras very seriously. One is the Yogacara school of Buddhism. That is one of the idealistic branches of Mahayana system, and some fringe groups, very small, tiny groups of Jaina monks, and of course the mainstream monastic communities in India. But that form a very tiny segment of total population. So we should remember this very well, in fact. So what Patanjali implies is self-restraint and the need for practicing some degree of self-restraint, self-control. That is what this implies. That's very important. Yoga Sutra, yoga system is not a monastic system. It's meant for the whole humanity in general. So what is implying is self-restraint, self-control, because without self-restraint at this level, one will not be able to do anything higher, protective. That is the. So that's what Patanjali is implying. In fact, Patanjali is not against marriage or the family structure. In fact, there are many, many great teachings in this Patanjali yoga system which are very helpful, which are meant for families, which enrich family values. So that should be. I would come to those sutras maybe after a few more sessions. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I feel, oh, you're free from confusion now. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for the question. In fact, that's true. 195 sutras. I try to bring all the relevant sutras together so that there will be no confusion. But again, today we could not complete the yamas and niyamas. That's why. So the simple idea is one should practice self-control, self-restraint, which is simple common sense, which any sensible parents, teachers, elders, good well-wishers will advise any person. As I get it. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you for the question.
Hariom Swamiji. Swamiji, you're just talking about self-restraint, right?
Yeah.
If I take a step back and I look at it from a material perspective, in the material world, one word that is thrown around a lot these days is ambition, and everyone is encouraged to be ambitious, to achieve, to be successful, right? So how does that play along with self-restraint? Because the way I see it, both are opposing each other.
That's true. Now, ambition, a sense of purpose in life, and dedication towards duty, achieving great things, are very important, very necessary for society. Now, um, you need if you are driving a horse carriage, the horses should be healthy, strong, they should run fast, but also you should have the reins in your hands. Then only you reach a destination. So ambitions are very good. Without ambitions, uh, you cannot really achieve anything. In fact, the first instruction that Lord Krishna gives to Arjuna is when Arjuna was trying to practice inaction out of total ignorance, out of total confusion. So the first instruction that Lord Krishna gives to Arjuna is not karma yoga, not spiritual knowledge or anything. Simple common sense wisdom. You are he uses certain terms which are not very respectable. You are an imbecile, you are a coward, you are a hypocrite, mithyachara sauchyade. There are many, many terms used in the Gita. People sometimes read Gita with the great sense of sanctity and piety, and they read these verses thinking that they are great prayers. They are all strong language words Arjuna, Krishna using to bring Arjuna into sense of his duty, because he was trying to run away from ambitions, which you mentioned is very important, very, very much necessary. Arjuna was claiming to be a man without any ambition, and he was claiming to be a man of wisdom. He was talking like a big philosopher. But Krishna knew actually he was not a philosopher. The Arjuna whom you find in the first chapter, Arjuna Vishada Yoga, is a metaphor of many of the negative qualities that every sensible parent will try to correct when they're bringing up the children. So he said you should have ambitions, you should be active, you should go after your goal, achieve these great things. That's the first thing. Then Lord Krishna says, well, all these are important. Now, equally important is you should have a sense of self-restraint. What should be your ambition? There is something beyond ambition. There is something beyond success. To make the success useful to you, to make your ambition something productive and constructive, something creative, something that contributes to your lasting welfare, well-being, you should practice certain spiritual disciplines so that you'll be able to enjoy the products, the effects, the good results of your ambition and your efficiency for your own good and the good of others. For that, we need some self-restraint. So remember, Patanjali Yoga Sutra is essentially talking about self-restraint, moderation, self-control. That's the idea. With that, if you have got a lot of ambition, it'll be wonderful.
Thank you, Swamiji.
You look at, in the 1930s, Hitler's Germany was technically the most advanced country in the world, and perhaps the most powerful, at least militarily, for some time. Now, what happened? So there are many examples, which I normally I'm not expected to discuss in the context of Yoga Sutras. So if you read history, if you read political history, social history, you find many instances. In fact, the rise and fall of civilization is the history of those who had too many ambitions and absolutely no self-restraint. That's idea. It's true in in individual life and also in social and national life. Thank you for the question.
Maharaj, one question. How do you group the yamas and niyamas? Is yamas more on the mind part and niyamas on our practice? The things that you mentioned are yamas and niyamas. Is there a classification?
Yeah. One important principle is yamas deal with certain higher principles of morality, which are necessary for the sustenance of social well-being, culture, and civilization. Niyamas are more or less disciplines pertaining to individual life. See, for example, santosha, contentment, purity, inner purity, outer purity, and then continued effort for achieving something good, great, then study, feeding the mind, good food, good ideas, and surrender to God. These disciplines are more or less meant for the individual spiritual seeker, but non-violence, absence of desire for things that belong to others, steya, and then in some higher values of pure life, and then contentment, the ability to restrain our greed, our desire for acquiring things. All these are necessary for the welfare of society and for the welfare of culture and civilization. That's why they are considered to be more universal. And niyamas are by themselves not always spiritual values, not spiritual in nature. They get a spiritual color only when they're practiced along with yamas. I mentioned this earlier. You can find many people in the world, many of them have these niyamas. They are very well dressed. They practice high principles of hygiene, shaucha, santosha. They are very happy. Of course, others are unhappy because of them, but they are very happy. Shaucha, santosha. Taba, again, dedication to work, continued effort, you find. Then, of course, they study. Some of them are great scholars who contributed not very good things to the world, So all these are there, you find. Now, these great qualities become positive qualities, virtues only when they're accompanied by yamas. Our classical villain of Ramayana, Ravana, he was, in real scholarship, he was not much inferior to Rama. And also he had a strong mind. He was very, very rigorous in his practice. And he was perfectly happy. Others were all unhappy, of course, because of him. So you can find all the niyamas were practiced by even demons. This is a demonical character in the mythological book. You can find in the Odyssey, or you can find Virgil or Homer's classical Greek, classical works also you find such characters. So they were very strong. They men of some strong principles, but they didn't have any of these higher values of niyamas. So that's why niyamas have got spiritual significance only when they're practiced accompanied by yamas. That's why.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Pranam Maharaj, this is Mark.
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of change the subject a little bit. I have this question about our attitude towards this world. And I read something recently. It's from the tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, and it's by a teacher named Abhavana Gupta.
Abhinava Gupta, yeah.
He says, the freedom from all of our miseries can neither be attained through the renunciation of the world, nor by hatred towards this world, but by experiencing the presence of God everywhere. I would like your comment on that quote.
Yeah, but if a beginner who is in pursuit of this higher experience of the presence of God everywhere, he will have to practice renunciation of worldly desires. So renouncing the world becomes almost irrelevant and unnecessary if you reach that stage, no doubt, because you don't have to run away from the world, you don't have to accept the world or renounce the world. You can live with the world. But for a beginner in spiritual life, as a discipline, he will have to practice some degree of detachment, some degree of self-discipline. That's why Christ said that you cannot worship Mormon and God together. But once you reach God, then you need not run away from wealth. There is no need to run away from birth once you reach the highest stage. But for a beginner, he should practice some degree of detachment, some degree of renunciation from worldly pursuits. That is in fact, that's what Advaita also says the same thing. Once you reach the highest state, you need not consider this world as mithya or unreal or relative, because everything is an expression of the divine. But before you reach that stage, for a beginner who is busy with his everyday life activities and so on, he should practice some degree of discipline. He should practice prayer. He should go to a church or a temple or any place of worship. Or if he can't, he can practice some meditation, prayer in his life, away from his other pursuits and duties. And maybe in course of time, he may reach a point where he can feel the presence of God everywhere. Then there is nothing to renounce and nothing to accept. In fact, that's a higher state. See, child has to practice alphabet writing in a big slate or something. He has to practice it. When he becomes a scholar, he doesn't have to practice that. So that's an important point. Yeah.
So some renunciation is required for a beginner.
But absolutely essential in all traditions.
Essential.
Yeah, in all traditions. Not even religious traditions, even in everyday life, to be a responsible household, you should practice some degree of renunciation. Every family member to live in perfect harmony with other members of the family or society, he should practice some degree of self-restraint, some degree of detachment, because that's the fundamental principle on which harmonious life is built. Not, as I mentioned, not only in society, but even in families, in any community.
Namaskaram, Swamiji. Just had a question about the 8 limbs of yoga. Do you have to perfect each limb of the yoga to attain samadhi, or how can you make progress on all the, for example, yama, niyama, etc. You can be you're able to get mastery over some of them, but not all of them. So how can you progress to samadhi?
Well, when we get fully established the yamas and niyamas, which are fundamental, then other disciplines become simpler and easier. Really, all the distractions that you practice, that you may experience while meditating, while praying, mostly because of lack of practicing yamas and niyamas to the fullest possible extent. If a person gets fully established in yamas and niyamas, then asana, pranayama, pratyahara all become natural and simple. This is strong foundation. Yeah. Yamas and niyamas, in a way, constitute many of the earlier disciplines mentioned in the Ashtanga Yoga of Buddhism also. So, for example, Samyak Drishti, Samyak Ajiva, Samyak Sankalpa, all these are involved in the early yamas and niyamas.
Thank you so much.
AJ, you're next. Go ahead.
Namaste, Swamiji. Thank you for excellent guidance. And I think partly my question is already answered because we already talked about brahmacharya, we talked about ambition, and also last question, renunciation. But one kind of doubt or question remains, which is you also described this state where, I mean, this is a very advanced state, of course, but you described that now you reach the state where nothing is left to renounce, right? So the satisfaction is so total that, you have reached that stage and nothing is left to renounce. So for a practitioner, how do I know I did enough? And the reason I say is obviously in our lifetime, we'll reach somewhere, may not be that ultimate state you describe, but we are somewhere on the path. So how do I know I did enough? Because even to go on this path, we need some ambition.
Yeah.
We need some sense of, hey, I want to achieve this, I want to do this. And at the same time, we want to renounce everything. So,
Yeah.
so then that's kind of the dilemma or the question
Yeah.
or the doubt I have.
I was just quoting from a verse in English. I was trying to interpret in English. One verse from the Atma Bodha, Shankaracharya's Atma Bodha, where a person who realizes highest Brahman, there is nothing more for him to achieve. That's a state that goes even far beyond the samadhi, the eighth discipline. That is the ultimate goal. So I was trying to project the stage of the highest degree of perfection in spiritual life. That's not about a beginner. We were just articulating one important verse from Atma Bodha. So important. Prakarana means one of the minor works of Shankaracharya. So the point is, all these yamas and niyamas that we discussed today, that's what we mostly discussed today. These values are to be practiced in everyday life along with our everyday duties and responsibilities. And they are meant for that. Yamas and niyamas are important for everyone. That's why the commentators are unanimous in emphasizing the point that yamas, ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparikata, non-violence, non-stealing, and then pure life and non-receiving of gifts, all these, that we don't need. All these are certain fundamental values which are necessary for the sustenance of society. For everyone to be a healthy family member, to be a healthy father, mother, husband, wife, sister, brother, teacher, student, or professional, to be efficient, to be able to interact with your colleagues in the office, to do our work properly, and also to face the problems that we may often encounter in a professional life. These values are important. They help us in encountering everyday life problems in a very mature manner, effective manner. So, total renunciation is nowhere mentioned here. Remember, that's important. Renouncing everything in total is not at all mentioned. I was just articulating one supreme state, the supreme state of an Avadhuta, maybe somebody like Shankara or Buddha mentioned. That way, articulating at the highest state of human evolution. Just, I think in one context, the subject came, the ultimate end of human life. That's why I was quoting a particular verse from Atmabodha. It is not part of yamas and niyamas. Yamas and niyamas are practical guidelines that we should have in our hand when we go to our office, when we leave the family, when a student goes to his school or college, or a teacher teaches students, when an administrator does his duty. For everyone, in all, that's why sarvadha, sarvabhumishu, in all respects, everywhere, in all aspects, these are fundamental disciplines. Certain fundamental uh, pieces of universal wisdom. That's what yamas constitute. And niyamas become natural for those who actually practice yamas. That's idea. And effortless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions. Please go.
Swamiji, this is Saugata. So the total concentration is samadhi.
Yeah.
Total concentration is samadhi. Now, to get total concentration, you must have total renunciation. Otherwise, you cannot get total concentration. So, so the moment we talk about samadhi, it implies that you have to, have total renunciation. Is that true?
Yeah. Now, abhyasa and vairagya are mentioned as tools for developing these qualities, yamas and niyamas, earlier. And the commentators say abhyasa and vairagya are only implied in the yamas and niyamas, in the Ashtanga Yoga. Now, renouncing everything, renouncing of desire, renouncing everything means renouncing of desire. That's idea. Whenever we talk about renunciation, we are not talking about renunciation of our beauties, renunciation of everyday things. We are only talking about renunciation of desire. Now, what do you mean by renouncing desire? Again, we should understand in its real contextual meaning. Desire here always means, well, desire for getting a high grade in examination is perfectly legitimate for a student. If he doesn't have that desire, he's wrong. Desire to teach well in a school or a college is perfectly legitimate, proper for a teacher. If he doesn't have that desire, he's not an ideal teacher. Like that, there is one kind of desire which actually helps us to practice higher values. So when we talk about renouncing desire, what we're talking about renouncing selfish desires. And selfish desires are always harmful to us and harmful to others. So these terms, it's good that you ask this question because they can be really, really confusing. See, look at Buddha. Buddha said that Trishna, desire, is the problem, the root of all problems. Without desire, how will you live? Buddha himself had a desire to teach his disciples. He established Buddha Sangha, Buddhist monastery, and his teachings were recorded in Tripitakas, Abhidhamma Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, and Sutta Pitaka. So if you read Buddha's teachings, there are great ideas. And he was himself He didn't keep quiet for a day. For 80 years, he was working very hard, traveling, teaching, inspiring, leading people, guiding people. How could he do that? He had a desire to teach the great things. After enlightenment, straight away he went to Benares. And there he taught his he gave his teachings to 5 ascetics who were meditating. They were traditional Hindu ascetics. So he taught to them. So they became the first recruits actually. So why did he go to Benares after getting enlightenment? He would have sat in a corner, in a tree, under a tree or in a forest. He had this great desire to teach what he realized to others. So when we talk about desire, we are as something to be renounced, as something to be overcome. We are actually talking about desire that is rooted in selfishness. And such desires can often be harmful to us and harmful to others. That's what you're talking about. Thank you for this question. These questions in many ways help me to clearly articulate the true implication. Otherwise, in a class, this may not be always possible. Thank you.
Swamiji, is it not easier to renounce everything and focus on God or focus on the ultimate goal rather than to have to navigate through the complexities of life, bearing in mind all these niyamas and yamas and trying to achieve the ideal goal?
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. If a person feels that, well, I want to renounce everything and turn to God, that person is a truly blessed person, if you can do that. But such people are very rare, and you can't talk about God and renouncing everything and surrendering to God in this 21st century mainstream society. Will not be even understood. So that's why Patanjali, this Patanjali system is meant for the mainstream. But in society, you find some exceptionally rare, blessed souls who don't have to navigate through these um, delicate parts of practicing these disciplines or reading disciplines. If they can surrender everything to God and renounce everything, that is certainly a very wonderful thing to do. But everyone may not be necessarily ready for it. That's the only problem. So thank you for your questions, and we hope to meet you all next week. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu. For those of you who may not be aware of this, I want to let you know that every Sunday at 11 o'clock, we have an ongoing series of talks on Swami Vivekananda's contribution to religious thought and spirituality. It has been going on, it continues, and every week at 11 a.m. in the morning, Sunday, every week, 11 a.m. in the morning. Thank you.